Sure.
So, hi everyone who's joined. It's great to see you all here. And just a brief introduction. This is an open discussion about the ACMG classification guidelines of variant classification, and we're just gonna go through the paper. There is no presentation of sorts, but we're just gonna go through the paper and just discuss as many classifications as we can in this 1 hour. And secondly, the session is being recorded and we will put it up on YouTube later. So that's just a disclaimer. And again, since like I said, this is an open discussion, please feel free to just chime in anywhere that you want to. And yes, discussion, just a learning platform. Just okay. So to start off with, so any variant that we come across, whether it's a missense, nonsense, frame shift, anything, all of them are given a specific criteria. Whether it's it can be pathogenic, it can be likely pathogenic, it can be a variant of uncertain significance, it can be benign, likely benign. So these guidelines basically tell us how to get to that classification, right? And we will just start off with the first. We'll start off in a chronological order of the pathogenicity and the strongness of the classification. So the first one is PVS1, which is applied for variants which are basically null variants. The first thing that we have to see if a variant is a null variant. So a null variant is anything which is causing a complete protein truncation. So if anywhere uh, any variant is not causing a complete truncation of the protein or a complete absence of the protein, we cannot call it a null variant, right? So a null variant wherein a null variant in a gene where loss of function is a known mechanism of disease, and non-canonical splice variants where RNA analysis confirms aberrant transcription. So, first thing, it should be a null variant. Second thing, we should have established literature of the fact that loss of function is a known mechanism of disease caused by that specific gene. For example, the variant that is given here, that is a splice site variant that is given, but I just took it as an example. This BAP1 gene. So this is a null variant, okay, and a loss of function is a known mechanism of this gene. But again, there are other things also wherein we will see whether PVS1 is being applied or not. Other things are that if the change is happening in the first initial 100 base pairs or in the last 50 base pairs, because what that does is if it's in the initial part or if the last part, there is a good chance that the protein is being just made in a abnormal state, or the protein is just not being truncated completely, or there is an absence of the protein. It's being made but not completely. So in those scenarios as well, PVS1 is not applicable. Apart from that, PVS1 is also uh, yeah, so the region in which the variant is found, that is also should be critical to the protein function. And another thing is that it should also remove more than 10% of the transcript, which essentially translates to the fact that the protein should be a truncated protein, right? So just to sum up PVS1, the first thing is that the variant should be a null variant wherein it is causing a complete absence or truncated protein. Loss of function should be a known mechanism of disease. And then if the variant is present in the initial 100 base pairs or the last 50 base pairs, it will not be applicable. And uh, there should be enough evidence supporting the pathogenicity of the region that the variant is identified in. And we so it's also for splice site variants, but that is a complete different thing, so we will not be focusing a lot on splice site variants for now, just in general missense, nonsense, and frame shift variants, right? Because there is a lot more to be studied about just the PVS1 classification, and there are multiple papers, and we can just go through that one by one, specific, just focusing on PVS1 in itself, right? And the so the second classification that we apply is PS1, that is applied to variants wherein the same amino acid change has already been noted, it's established, and regardless of the nucleotide change. So basically, we are doing base substitution, right? There will be a different base substitution which is causing the same or which is causing the same amino acid change. I Yes, so there is okay, just a second. Okay. So we're on the PS1 classification. Like I said, if that particular variant has already been reported in literature before as pathogenic or likely pathogenic, and the only difference between the reported variants is the different base substitution, and the protein change is the same, that in for those variants PS1 can be applied. So there are also criterias where a certain classification cannot be applied with a second criteria. For example, if you see PS1 cannot be applied with PM4, right? Because we'll look at it later that PM4 is applied to variants wherein the protein is getting extended. So that is a completely different classification to provide, and that is a moderate criteria. Then there is PS2 and PM6. So PS2 is a strong classification and PM6 is a moderate classification. Both of these essentially say that if the de novo status in the patient is confirmed, um, that is when we can use this specific criteria, right? For example, if we're getting a trio testing in itself, therein we're finding the variant, we're able to see that it is de novo in the proband, and we also have maternity and paternity confirmed in that, because it is a complete trio testing that is coming to us with the parents and the proband. In those cases, we can definitely look into applying PS2 and PM6. But PS2, considering that it is a strong criteria, PS2 should be applied where paternity and maternity is being confirmed, the de novo status is being confirmed, and also the gene has previous evidence and literatures mentioning that a lot of variants found in that gene are de novo, right? And then PM6 can be applied wherein you're finding that variant in the de novo state in the proband and trio cases, but then there is not enough evidence stating that PM6, that the variants in that particular gene can be de novo. Okay, hi everyone, those who have joined. We're just going through ACMG classification of variants, and we're on PS2 right now. We have covered PVS1 in brief and PS1. And so PS2 and PM6, like I said, it's for de novo status being confirmed, maternity and paternity being confirmed, and also previous evidence of the fact that the variant is like the variants in the gene are usually present in a de novo state.
So, Kriti, I have a question for you here.
Yes, yes.
Can you hear me?
Yes, yes, we can hear you.
So, how do you differentiate? How would you classify use 2 or PM6 for recessive conditions, or would you use it only for dominant?
It would only be for dominant, because the de novo status can it's
It only
usually seen in
confirm
AD
dominant.
conditions more than AR conditions, because for AR conditions, if the variant is identified, there are other criteria that can be applied, like PM3, which basically tells us that the variant has been previously identified in a complex state for an AR condition, or even if in a homozygous state it's been present. So,
Yeah,
from,
I'm surprised that they mentioned that. Yeah,
sorry,
I'm just surprised. Shouldn't they write that generally?
आपका
Because
आवाज
even
आपका
the
आवाज
old
थोड़ा
class,
कट रहा है.
sorry, please continue.
सॉरी, योर वॉइस इज ब्रेकिंग अ लिटिल, एकदम समझ थोड़ा नहीं समझ आया इतना. Okay, so moving on to the PS3 classification. So PS3 is applied when there is enough evidence for the variant that it can have a damaging effect on the gene product, right? So PS3 is usually, from what I have been using it as, it's mostly applied for like missense variants, because if it's a frame shift and a nonsense variant, it is already being applied. PVS1 is being applied for those variants if those are null variants, right? So that is a much stronger criteria to use than a PS3. And PS3 and PVS1 actually cannot be applied together, right? And even if we're talking about splice site variants, like it's mentioned here, that if we're talking about RNA splicing assays of splice site variants wherein we have enough functional evidence noting that this particular splice site variant can have protein, can have an effect on the gene or the gene product, in those cases that has now been moved to PVS1 rather than PS3. So BS3, more or less from what I have been using it as, it's mostly been used for missense variants, right? And there should also be like enough evidence. There should at least uh, well established evidence on ClinVar. For example, you can use ClinVar to know whether there have been previously reported literature of the variant, what the variant has been classified as by other laboratories, and what evidences they have for that particular variant. And PS3 again is a strong criteria to use, so it should be used very carefully. And the uh, research should definitely. Okay, sorry, just. Yes. So next is, so like I said, a lot of criterias have this thing that a different criteria cannot be used with it. But for this, it says that PS3 and PP3 can be applied together for missense variants, right? Because PS3 will tell us where there is functional evidence for assessing the protein activity, and PP3 tells us whether the variant has damaging or deleterious results in silico tools. So they can be applied together and they can be applied independent as well, because a lot of variants will have a deleterious or damaging in silico results, but then we would not have enough functional evidence, enough literature available for that variant. So in those cases, PS3 will not be applied and just PP3 can be applied. Next is PS4. So PS4 is for the prevalence of the variant in affected individuals is significantly increased compared to the prevalence in controls, and this is mostly used for AD conditions, because again AD conditions, for AR conditions, a different uh, criteria like PM3, it is mentioned there, can be used to count the biallelic cases. And PS4, if so, like it said that PS4 can be used at a moderate level of evidence if the variant has been previously identified in two or more unrelated affected individuals, or as a supporting level of evidence if it has been reported in like one unrelated effective individual with a rare and specific phenotype, and has not been reported in nomad or any other population frequencies, right? So this just says that it is most applicable for autosomal dominant disorders where there is absence or rarity in nomad database, which helps us apply PM2 and PS4 both to a variant. Right. So PS4 will is more or less used for autosomal dominant disorders, and for AR disorders, like I said, better to use PM3 rather than PS4. Next is PM1. We've moved on to the moderate criterias. PM1 is applied for variants where we know that the variant is present in a mutational hotspot or a critical or a well established functional domain. Right. So PM1 will be applied to variants where there is evidence that there are not a lot of benign missense variants or any benign variants in that particular region where we have identified our gene. So, like it said, the PM1 should be applicable to the variants where there is evidence of pathogenic missense variations in that particular region. Yes, so we know that there is the region in which the variant has been found. It is a protein of a known function. We know that it is uh, very important to protein function. It is and a lot of other missense variations have already been noted in that specific region. So this can be checked. For example, I use ClinVar or HGMD to know that if in that specific region or nearby that region there are other reported variants or not. Again, the reported variant should not be VUSs. They should also be pathogenic and likely pathogenic, which tells us that yes, there is definitely, this region is definitely very important to protein function, and any change in that specific region will definitely cause some changes in the protein function. And like it is mentioned, PM1 is not appropriate for variants which are predicted to result in a premature termination codon or splicing effects. Again, for termination codons or null variants, we can always go back to PVS1. And if we have enough evidence, we can apply a strong PVS1, or if there is less evidence, we can apply a moderate. Right. So a lot of these are specifying only on missense variants, because whenever we talk about nonsense frameshift variants, we can always, the first thing to see is whether PVS1 is being applied to those variants or not. Right, because PVS1 will incorporate a lot of the things that are used, for which different criteria are used for missense variants. And PM1 cannot be applied with PM5 or PP2. So we'll see later that PM5 is So we'll see later that PM5 is applied if there are different amino acid changes reported in the same codon as pathogenic or likely pathogenic. And PP2 is applied wherein we know that that particular gene has a larger number of pathogenic missense variants as compared to benign missense variants. So PM1, PM5, or PP2 cannot be applied together. And then PM2 is for variants which are absent from control or at an extremely low frequency if recessive, right? Because recessive variants can always be present in a het AR state, in a carrier status in a lot of patients, right? So that can always be a part of the population database frequencies because it is present in just one allele. But for AD variants, for example, if it is absent from a database such as Nomad, we can very well just go ahead and apply PM2, right? And for again, like I said, for X-linked recessive disorders or autosomal disorders, if there are no homozygotes or hemizygotes found in nomad database, so if any particular gene, if any particular variant, if you check it on nomad, it will tell you whether it has been found in people or not, and also tell you whether that particular variant has ever been noted in a homozygous or a hemizygous state. So if any variant has ever been reported in a homozygous state, there is a sort of a chance that it can be non-causative, right? So we cannot apply PM2 even to those variants. So, like I said, application of PM2 at supporting levels may be appropriate where a variant is extremely rare in nomad. So for PM2, it is a little difficult also, because if we see any variant that we are finding in the database, a lot of the variants that we uh, get to analyze after it has gone through all of the bioinformatic pipelines, and we have applied all of the filters that we used to uh, to kind of shortlist variants. In those variants, more or less, a lot of those variants are not present in population database frequencies. However, if there is evidence of that variant being benign or likely benign, and if we apply a PM2, the classification of the variant can change from likely benign to a VUS just because PM2 is being applied. Right. So for those specific variants, if we know that the variant is likely benign or just benign, application of PM2 is not applied to those variants. ठीक है. And then again, for certain types of variants, such as larger or complex in insertion deletion variants, repeat expansion or contractions, which are less readily identified by NGS, in those cases also we cannot apply PM2. If the variant identification is not in the purview of NGS testing, we have to be wary of how we can apply PM2 in those variants. Now, PM3, like I mentioned previously, PM3 is specifically for recessive disorders. So, if a recessive disorder, the variant that we're identifying, it has been identified previously to be present in the trans state with a pathogenic variant, in those cases, PM3 can definitely be used. And if the variant that we are identifying has not been reported previously as a compet variant, right, but we are finding it in a compet variant with in a compet state with another pathogenic or likely pathogenic variant, in those cases also we can apply a PM3 moderate, because we do not have previous known evidence of the fact that the variant has been previously reported in patients with a disease phenotype with a likely pathogenic or pathogenic variant, but we are finding it in our sample. So we can always just use it in a moderate state. Okay, and even for homozygous variants, if it is present in just a homozygous state and not in a compact state with other variants, even in those cases, we'll apply PM3 moderate. Right. So, like I said, for autosomal recessive disorders, it is always recommended to count cases using PM3 rather than PS4, because PS4 primarily can be used for dominant variants. Now, PM4, like we talked about while we were talking about PVS1, that PM4 cannot be applied with PVS1 variants, because PVS1 variants is specific to those which are causing a complete truncation or absence of the protein. But PM4 can be applied to variants which are causing a uh, extension of protein, which are just stop loss variants, for example, right? Um, so these are just completely opposite from stop gain variants, because therein you're getting a truncated protein. Here you're getting extended protein. So PM5 is can be used for variants where there is a different missense change been reported before. A different amino acid change in that same codon has been reported before. So again, if the previously reported variant is not pathogenic or likely pathogenic in our databases or in the literature that we find, if it's been classified as a VUS multiple times, even in ClinVar, in those cases PM5 is not considered to be applied very much, because the variant, different amino acid change in the same codon should be reported as a pathogenic or a likely pathogenic variant. PM6 again, like uh, PM6 and PS2 are similar, but in PS2, we have proper confirmation of maternity and paternity, wherein a lot of cases that come to us as a trio testing sample, there we definitely know that, okay, yes, paternity and maternity and the status of that particular variant is confirmed at the same time. Yes, in those cases, PS2 can be applied, and also, again, there should be enough evidence in literature that variants in that particular gene are known to be de novo, right? And PM6 again, we can apply it when there is assumed de novo, but even to apply PM6, there should be at least some sort of evidence that you can fall back on for applying PM6, that okay, the variants in this gene, again, they have been previously reported to be in a de novo state. So if we have that evidence with us, it is just better to have that evidence before applying PM6 for cases where we do not have confirmation of paternity and maternity and the status of that particular variant in the parents. So, like, is there anything that anyone would like to add up until now? Because we have just supporting criterias remaining now, and just these are all that could be covered in this session. So, if there is anything that anyone wants to add, feel free to do that. So the next is supporting criterias. So PP1 is can be applied when there is co-segregation with disease in multiple affected family members in a gene, which is definitely known to cause the disease. Right. So we can use it in autosomal dominant, recessive, X-linked imprinted disorders, all of them. Right. And so it basically, if it has been reported previously as well in like different multiple affected family members in the same family, like if multiple times it has been reported before in unrelated families and multiple times in that same family, so in those cases pp1 can be applied. It can also be applied if you have that particular information for your specific variant and for your specific case, right? If you are able to test like multiple family members and you're able to identify that variant in multiple family members, and those family members are affected and the gene is known to cause the disease, again, if it's a VUS variant, less likely that we can apply pp1. We should have enough evidence that this variant is causative, and just yeah, okay. So PP2 is applied for missense variants where there is a low rate of benign missense variants and a higher number of pathogenic or likely pathogenic missense variants. And just missense variants are a common mechanism of disease, right? So for diseases wherein we know that missense variants are not as causative, for example, just the top of my head, the gene TTN, for example, missense, it's a high variation rich gene, so there's always a lot of missense variants, a lot of synonymous variants in that gene, but we cannot report missense or synonymous or splice site variants in that gene if we do not have enough functional evidence. So if it is we know that for that gene nonsense and frameshift variants are more causative, in those cases pp2 cannot be applied. We have to have evidence that missense variants definitely cause disease. PP3 is applied for variants wherein a lot of different in silico tools are reporting that variant to be deleterious or damaging. Examples of in silico tools that can be used are mutation testers, SIFT, Polyfen, and there's a lot more that just these three on the top of my head that can be used. Like if it's deleterious and damaging in all of the silico in silico tools, we can apply PP3. PP4 is applied when the patient's phenotype or family history is highly specific for a disease, right? So if PP4 is something that can be applied if even if you do not have previously reported evidence of that particular variant or that particular gene, but you are able to correlate that identified gene with the patient's phenotype, and it is a very strong correlation, and and the variant that it identified is a good variant. You can just go ahead and apply PP4 as a supporting criteria, and it can be used to just have an ultimate effect on the classification of the variant. So for PP4, essentially, if you do not have previously known literature, this can just be used for your specific case and for your specific patient. Right, so this is just done with the pathogenic and likely pathogenic criterias. I will not go into benign criteria for now because there's not a lot of time. So we can get into that and specifics of other types of criteria and other types of classification and subsequent sessions. So this is where I'll stop for now. So anyone has anything to add, or if something that can be read about more, if you have any questions, we can all discuss it. The discussion is just open for everyone.
Good job, Sukriti. I think you covered all the main points. Have you read the Richards et al. Paper, the
Um,
ACMG Richards et al. 2015?
2015. Yeah, I mean I remember reading that, but haven't really
No, actually,
compared the differences.
only reason why I ask is actually it has a very easily interpretable table.
Oh, okay.
I used to just print that table out, and I used to have
Hmm.
it on my lap, at my desk, and it made my life very easy and simple. So
Hmm.
it summarizes everything
Okay.
in a table, and it also helps us, characterize like what all categories when they come together, the variant is pathogenic, likely pathogenic. So it gives all of that information in the table. So it's actually
Yes,
pretty
yes,
everything in
yes.
one place, pretty
Yes, I
easier.
remember
So,
that table
um,
specifically because I still
yeah,
keep going back to that table to classify variance
yeah,
manually, because that is actually
exactly.
very easy to understand. I remember because that was the first thing you told me to do when I joined Lilac. Just read this paper.
I'm glad you remember that.
Yeah.
But so, what is actually the difference in the current paper and the old one? What is the upgrade? Is there
Um.
any change? Because I couldn't, I mean, in the categories itself, I don't think there is any change.
Yes.
I unfortunately couldn't go through this 2023 paper
Hmm.
completely, but what is it? What is different from the old paper?
I think even I will have to just go back and read the previous paper completely, and this also just in entirety, to understand what differences are there. Because, like you said, like the basics of classifications and criteria, I don't think that has changed. That has remained the same. Just additional things have been added from what I can understand. Because I don't remember that paper having like supporting and a moderate classification for variants. But then, with the recent Clinton guidelines and a lot of other papers that were reported, we have for for PVS1 specifically, we have a lot of different criterias to apply PVS1 or for splice site variants, right? So just
Okay.
that is, I will go back and see what exactly is the difference. That is something I'll also have to see. Not entirely sure.
Sure. I'll also maybe hopefully read through it all by then.
I will also.
So, does this paper also include copy number variations?
It does. It does.
Okay.
But again, that is a very different topic to just
Yeah, yeah, of course.
definitely cannot be covered together with just SMVs. So we'll hopefully get to that as well in one of the later sessions.
Absolutely. Sure.
Yes.
Good job.
Thank you.
Really well done, Sukriti. It was. very important to understand, especially the other part, the ones that we don't usually use, the benign and other things.
Hmm.
So, thank you for that. And it was a good revision, much needed.
Yes, even I needed it.
Amazing session, Sukriti. Thank you so much for talking about each point in detail. I also have a question regarding the pipeline, like a particular diagnostic tool, or like in what depth they might have looked at a variant. Do you think these guidelines also kind of affect that, or looking at data from a different perspective, or looking certain genes very closely? Do you think that works? And how does these guidelines work in pipeline development or something like that?
Um, no, so from what I have been using, like even if different pipelines are used, even with those pipelines, so pipelines basically include what, like what the variant depth is, like what we are saying, what the frequency of that variant is in our own databases, right? And then what else is used? Yes, variant depth, what the population frequency of the of the variant is, and yeah, because with the just basic basic pipelines, it ACMG is not taken into consideration with just the basic pipelines. The only thing that is taken into consideration pertaining to classification of the variant is if that variant is reported as likely benign or benign in ClinVar. Those variants are, yes, avoided. Those are just filtered out by the pipelines initially itself, right? So if there is just enough Woki ClinVar P, even if it is reported once as likely benign, it is usually just not included after the pipeline filtration has been done. So all of the variants that come after these two three filtrations, whatever is related to the phenotype, me personally, like I'll go through all of the variants one by one and classify them, and just see, like, if again I use databases, like for example you can use Franklin, you can use Varzome. They will tell you what they classify the variant as, so you can just have an idea of it, whether it, so if the variant is being classified as likely benign or benign by Franklin, so you know that okay, this variant is not something that we need to look at very closely, because it does not have enough in silico evidence, it does not have, enough protein evidence, we do not have evidence of that particular mechanism of the protein to be disease causing. So I don't think it's specific like that. Like I personally go through all of the variants and just see what can be classified as.
Yeah, that makes sense. Thank you so much for answering.
Yes. Is there any other input from anyone else? We have a lot of seniors here. Hi Nupur. Hi Shivanjali ma'am.
I was wondering if I could give you a variant and you could actually work out the different categories.
Yes, we can do that. That'll be a fun activity.
Yeah. So I'm just going to tell you.
Yes.
Okay. So the gene is CARD14
Okay.
and the mutation is C.458 G to C.
C.458 G to C.
Yeah.
Okay.
Do you need any other information? Just let me know.
Okay. Cool.
And it's a homozygous mutation.
Okay. Cool. Got it.
Maybe you can share your screen.
Okay. Just a second. I will just open all of the tools first. How do I share that? Okay, so the first thing that we can check the variant on is just in silico tools. Like we can just check whether what the cat score of the variant is. So cat score is a good tool to use for missense for SNVs basically. I use it a lot, and if it is a good cat score. So do you want the variant to be checked in CS38 or CS37?
Doesn't matter. Go with the one that is used more often. 37. Has
Okay.
everybody completely shifted to 38? No, right?
No, no. We are also
No.
using 37 only abhi tak.
Huh. Then check in
So
37.
okay. Can you also give the chromosomal location, or should I take that from Franklin for the variant?
Chromosome location I can give you.
Okay. Okay.
Chromosome 17,
Yes.
G dot,
Okay.
801,
801
840,
840
21,
21.
G to C.
Okay.
If you want the transcript details, let me know.
Okay. So with cat score, the first thing, of course, the chromosomal position and the alternate allele. And what I do is I include annotations. What that does is basically give you a cat score. And so with just the cat score, I can say that it is a benign variant, possibly not a good VUS variant because the cat score is very low. And so SIFT and polyphen scores are not given for this variant. Is it a nonsense or a splice site variant? I think no. It's is it a nonsense
Actually,
variant?
not at all. It's a missense variant.
It's a missense variant. Okay. I think there has to be some difference in the uh, C dot position of the variant based on different transcripts. So
You
I
want me to tell you the transcript?
no, because cat score will have cat score doesn't really use transcript. We can also check it on mutation tester.
Sure.
Sorry about that. Yes, I
Is it
think
me or is this not visible? I
it's
can't see
not.
mutation test. I just see cat.
Okay, wait, I'll just open it on the same one.
Yeah.
So mutation tester is basically telling me that there are a lot of transcripts for that variant. So we will also need a particular transcript to look at.
Okay. I have the one that should I tell you I'll tell you which one. Hold on.
हाँ इसी में से बता
Mm. Is there one ending with 8509.2?
दे.
No, right?
No, it could be the NM transcript, but then that could be मतलब इसमें हो सकता है. We can check.
Sure, go ahead. Just check the first one.
Okay, just 1 second. So it's benign even on mutation
It's
tester,
benign.
and the cat score is very low. So this is definitely not something that I would even want to classify as a VUS.
Fair enough.
Yes.
Fair enough.
Okay, so does anyone else have any other questions or anything else that we can discuss or talk about?
Hi guys, whoever is attending, like all the rest of you, hello, Pooja here. This is a good opportunity to discuss, the challenges you face. If you're doing variant annotation, I mean classification, or if you want to learn that, like if you have questions or if you want to share case studies where you had challenges, so this is a good opportunity. Do open up.
We can also check the variant on Franklin to see what Franklin says, just to get an idea of what at least Franklin is classifying it as.
But among all of this, which one do you prefer?
Yes. Sorry. Yes, please go ahead. So Franklin is also classifying it as close to likely benign rather than a VUS.
Hmm.
So again, so this is a good example of a variant being classified as VUS only because PM2 is applied, and there is no other evidence, there is no other in silico tool telling us that the variant can have a deleterious effect, right? Because just applying PM2 for this variant gives it a VUS classification, but then not a good variant to be even classified as a VUS.
Can you check with the gene name? This is not the gene name.
Yes, this is a different one, I think. Wait.
Can you check with the gene name?
Yes, I will do that. So the chromosomal location is giving me this specifically. Right. So even this is more or less the same thing. The VOS is only being applied because it has a low frequency in nomad population databases.
Hmm.
I think there is definitely something with the particular location on the different transcripts and all, because in different transcripts it is also in a non-coding region sort of.
Right.
So there is definitely something with this variant.
But it seems to be benign. Yeah,
Yes, likely benign, I would say.
likely benign.
Yes.
Got it. Thank you.
Yes. So is there anything else that we can discuss, or we can also go ahead and end the session? And we
And
can
guys,
meet next week. So just for those of us who are remaining here, next week what we're trying to do is conduct mock counseling sessions, so that you can have a free resource to get back to if you need to know what a specific counseling, where a specific type of counseling looks like, what is needed in that session, what the patient needs to have. So what we're trying to do is basically create a database that can be shared with either students, different GCs, or even with patients, so that even patients know, okay, this is the kind of information I need to have before going into a counseling session. And we will be trying to do that in regional languages as well, but then that is something we'll do once we have a few of the disorders and type of scenarios uh, just completed in just English and Hindi, just basics of it. So if there is anyone who would very much like to contribute to that and have a just do a mock session, please reach out. Everyone is welcome. So
Nupur, Pooja, we are hoping to also get you guys for the mock sessions.
Unfortunately, next week I'm traveling on Thursday. I'm out of town.
It's
Not
okay. We
next
have
week,
a lot of Fridays.
sometime in
Every
future.
Friday
Yes,
there'll be session. You just
yes,
choose one Friday and we'll schedule it. That's it.
Oh, it's
yes.
next Friday, right? Yeah, I
Next
think Friday.
Friday, so we either have like either Akashi or Vishakha joining for a session. So the specialization that they have is either prenatal or PGT session, PGT counseling. So we'll focus on that, and the primary reason for is also just to have something to go back to understand the psychosocial and LC concepts in an Indian situation, because we've just been studying about American situations, and I'm kind of tired of it.
Fair enough.
And we're gonna have those sessions quite often, like in between our like journal club discussions or like
Actually, I
interviews.
did
We'll also
want
have
to
those
reach
kind
out
of
to you,
sessions.
ma'am, because I was speaking to Vishakha about it, and she suggested that I should reach out to you to have a sort of information about regional language के GCs. So, because for any regional language का session, I would need two GCs because मुझे नहीं आता regional language. So, uh, for example, like if I'm doing it in a Marathi thing, so I know that Mahresh is there, Vishakha is there, right? So ऐसा दो GC लगेंगे for any regional language to be covered. तो आई थिंक आप बता सकते हो किस किस को रीच आउट करना है फॉर दैट.
Sure.
ठीक है.
I think if you have puja, we almost have 5 languages.
यस.
More than five
फाइव
languages.
फाइव सेशंस तो आप यू विल बी अ जीसी कंडक्टिंग इन ईच लैंग्वेज एंड यू कैन चूज योर ओन सेकंड जीसी टू टॉक टू इन द सेशन.
Sure.
ठीक है. Okay, we'll go ahead and end the session for now.
Thank you.
Let's
It
meet
was a good
again next
session.
week
It
for
was a good
something.
refresher.
Yes. Thank you, Sukriti, for the session. And also, we'll have a part 2 and part 3 of this session
Yes.
where she will go in detail about VUS and Benang and discuss this
Yes, yes.
paper. So, if you have any further questions, do bring them in the next sessions of this paper. Hope to see you guys soon.
See ya.
See
Hi,
you.
it was a very
Bye.
nice session, guys.
Hi, Nupur.
Hi.
Hi.
Bye, Nupur.
Hello.
Share your video now.
Huh?
Show your video. Turn your video on.
It's been so
I'm
long.
in office actually.
Hi.
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 Oh,
Hi.
it's so nice to see you.
Yeah, so nice to see you all too.
Oh my
It's
God, this is the office.
yes, I was
Yeah,
about to say that आप office
it is
में बैठे.
office.
Oh, that's great.
I have to be here till 8, so
Ah,
Okay.
ठीक है, done almost.
I'll
Bye
see
bye.
you guys next
Yes.
week.
Sure. Bye bye. See you next week.
Bye.
Bye.
Guys.
Bye.
Bye.
Good night.
Good night.